You ever lose a point and all of a sudden your team gets perpetually killed over and over, allow the enemy to roll through from one point to the next for essentially free? That's called snowballing, and it's costing you tons of games and much SR. Let's break down exactly what you need to do to stop snowballing and what you can do to get some easy wins by snowballing the enemy. But before we get to that, do me a favor and go check out GameLeap.com. That's all you have to do. You just got to go to the website, go check it out, look around. You might find something that catches your interest. Now that seems like enough talking. Let's just jump right into it, shall we? So before we jump into exactly what you need to do to stop this from happening, we need to ask the question, why do you get snowballed? This happens when the enemy constantly pushes up and you and your team get picked over and over again, and the enemy basically wins whole team fights for free. This means losing 1 point can all of a sudden snowball into 2 points lost, or even the third, because you'll have such huge ult disadvantage. So you might be wondering, what can you do to stop snowballing right now? So let me break down the many things that you can do to fix this problem instantly. The first thing is you need to full group after a lost team fight. Stop going in and go back to your team. Tell your teammates to do the same. You want a complete full group. That means the second you spawn, if you know that you're not going to be able to be full grouped, let's say you got a close spawn and your teammates got a far spawn, you need to do whatever you can to get back to your team as quickly as possible without getting staggered by the enemy. The problem is if you allow yourself to get staggered, then you become part of the problem where your teammates will eventually take a fight 5v6. The reason this is so important is because you need a full team fight. If you keep fighting 5v6s or 4v6s, you're never putting you and your team on the level playing field. And I know what you're saying. Well, my teammates keep staggering in and there's nothing I can do. But for one, I guarantee you that you are also staggering yourself, or you're not doing everything you can to stop your teammates from staggering. And two, I'm going to give you other tips and tricks on what you could do even if your team are also staggering in. Let's move on to number 2 on our list, which is give up ticks. Let's say that they're trying to cap something like first King's Row. You can give up a certain amount of ticks, 1 or 2 ticks, and try to soft group before you enter a fight. This can really help you prevent getting snowballed. What do I mean by this? So imagine if you're only 3 people, you traded resources, but the enemy has 3 people on the point and you have 3 people, but you're not that confident in taking the team fight. You could give the enemy team 1 or 2 ticks, wait for your team to come back to you, take another team fight before the enemy caps the full point. Sure, they're gonna get some ticks, but giving them a couple ticks is way better than just letting them take the point for free, which is what's gonna happen if you just try to take a super disadvantaged fight. Trying to give up points and having full team fights is far better, not only to give you the best shot at winning that fight, but to set you up for ultimates in the preceding. If you take some fights that weren't full team fights and you lose them, the people that took the fight might have some ult charge, but the people that were coming back from spawn will have none, and then you'll have an even bigger ult disadvantage. If you group up and take a full team fight, even if you lose the team fight, you and your team will be far better off, have far more ultimates for the preceding team fights down the line, and the enemy will probably be more obligated to invest ultimates in that fight, which could be very good for your ultimate advantage going forward. Now moving on to the third thing that you specifically can start doing. I know I talked about 2 things that you and your team can do, but if you're talking about you specifically, ultimates can bring about tempo by getting picks and forcing the enemy to regroup. Let me give you this example. Oftentimes the enemy will actually push up off the payload and try to confirm staggers as like 5 people while 1 person pushes the payload, which I'm going to really talk about when I talk about how you're supposed to snowball. But if they try to do this and you use your ultimate to secure 1 or 2 kills, all of a sudden it's a liability for the enemy to push up too far because they realize that they're going to be too split. They're not going to have the resources in order to stay a sustained fight out into the enemy team, and the enemy team could potentially flip a team fight. So they're more incentivized to actually full group and they're less likely to stagger. This means if you can simply solo ult an enemy, even doing something like gravitoning someone that's overextending, getting those kills immediately can allow you and your team to push far up, be much more safe, and the enemy is going to have to full group, and then your team and the enemy team are going to have a full team fight for the next fight. This almost forces the full team fight. And I'm telling you this, in my opinion, there is no ultimate that is not worth stopping a snowball. If you can use one single ultimate to stop a snowball and potentially get 1 or 2 fights throughout the whole second point of a map, instead of just simply getting 1 fight or no fights, it is 100% worth it, because what will happen often is people will be too hesitant to use their their ultimates, their team won't regroup, and they'll never get a good chance to actually use their ultimates, or they'll end up using it in a lost team fight where their team is already staggered. Solo ulting a person, tempo ulting a person, do whatever you have to stop that snowball in its tracks, and you will have a far better time and a much higher chance to actually stop the enemy snowball and get some real team fights in. Then we go to the next tip on our list. This is another thing that you can specifically do to stop snowball, and that's to swap to a character that can punish enemies for pushing too hard. This means playing a character that really punishes what the enemy is bringing to the table, or playing a direct hard counter. This is something like swapping to Mei out of nowhere and walling off the enemy when they're pushing far too hard into your team. She's a character that can directly punish the enemy from overextending, even if the enemy has advantage. Let's say there's only 3 of y'all and there's 5 of them pushing up on you. If you wall off just their Rhine, kill him before the ice wall goes down, then all of a sudden they don't have their main tank. Even if they have numbers advantage, they can't really push you and be aggressive. You can understand how there's a lot of different characters that can punish enemies for being overly aggressive. There's a lot of different things like playing a counter. You could even swap to something like Far Mercy out of nowhere. And then all of a sudden, if they don't have a hit scan or any counters to you, your Far Mercy, you can't be pushed up and staggered. And as long as they try to push up on your allies, you have the mobility to get away, and you can also punish them for doing that to your allies. You could even protect your allies, even if your allies have a disadvantage against what they're playing. You see what I'm talking about here? There's a lot of different picks that you can swap to stop the enemy from snowballing, and you can even swap to something that will shut down an enemy ultimate. You could swap to something like Sombra, hack a Genji that's gonna blade. You could swap to something like Diva and eat an enemy Hanzo's dragon, or even a grab. There's a lot of different things that you can do to potentially stop a snowball, stop the enemy from ulting in onto your team. Now, another thing that you should know to do is, we talked about giving up ticks and recontesting, but something else that you should also do is make sure that you give up points when they're not winnable. Sometimes re-entering a point as 4 people against 6 people is just gonna be a fight that you have no chance of winning, and it's better to try to fight enemies early after they cap the point. Let's talk back on the King's Row example. Fighting them under arches right after they cap first point is way better than potentially fighting them later on in streets, because you have a natural choke point that you can put pressure on them through, and you have a lot of area to kite back as your resources dwindle, to get cooldowns back, to get shield health back, to get healed up, things like that. So you can potentially get 2 fights as well if you fight them early and die on point, which is something I'm going to talk about in a second. You could potentially get multiple fights throughout streets, and this can allow for more overall team fights, and that's the goal here, guys, to make sure that you get more team fights, either by punishing the enemy with your counter picks, either by tempo ulting the enemy to force them to regroup, either by fighting early so that you get respawns and you can meet them before they cap the second point. These are all things that incentivize and force the enemy to have a real full team fight with your team, because that's how you get snowballed, is by not having actual team fights. You're never giving you and your team an even fighting chance. Now, speaking of giving your team a fighting chance, the last and final thing that you need to understand is you need to be able to make a quick evaluation when a fight is lost. Is it something that you can get away from and try to regroup back to your team, or should you die on point? This is the thing that a lot of people get wrong, is some people will see that a fight is lost, but they don't recognize a fight is lost early enough. They're trying to fight the enemy, they're fighting the enemy already capped, the enemy's pushing, then they're like, oh crap, we lost this fight, let me get away. They get pushed up on and they get killed extremely late. This is a bad thing that you're doing, and if you're doing it, you're causing your team to get snowballed. What you need to do is you need to identify, oh, the team fight's lost, I need to get out of here right now. And if you don't do that, you need to understand that it's your job to die on cart. Why do you need to die on cart, you ask? You need to stop the cart so that you will die, but the cart won't move, so you have enough time to get there and group up with your team. This is a really common call that you should call as well as do yourself: die on cart. And I'm not talking about juking around, going to the left, going to the right, trying to kill an enemy and then get to the cart. You need to push your body to the cart. Straight to the cart. I don't care if they're stunning you, killing you, flashing you. Force them to kill you so that you actually go to respawn. That's what you want. And in order to force people to actually kill you, you have to beeline straight for the cart. I hope this really makes sense to you, because this is so important, and it allows you to have way more fights, and it allows you to have way more team fights, which is the goal to not get snowballed. I think y'all get the picture here, but that is the general rule of thumb. Now let's talk about some simple things you could do to snowball an enemy, and some simple rules of thumb so that you could start snowballing enemies throughout second. This is what you should do almost every time, and it's something that a lot of people get wrong, but it's really what you should do. A lot of times when people cap an objective, they put 3 people on the payload and they say, hey, 3 people on the payload, 3 people push up. Here's the problem with that. The enemy could start to half group and maybe 3 of them are there. And if you're 3 versus their 3, you can't really aggressively push up on them and kill them, right? Let's say 3 of the enemy has good spawns and 3 of them have bad spawns. But because you left 3 of your teammates on the cart, you're effectively going to take a 3v3 if you try to engage the enemy or push up on them. However, this is what you should do instead. If you're trying to snowball the enemy, put 1 person on cart. Usually a healer that can put in value from a distance, someone like Zenyatta. Then 5 of you push up and try to get the staggers. That way, even if the enemy has 3 people or 4 people, you can kill them incredibly fast. You can be hyper aggressive and get the kills and get the snowball. Why does this matter more than pushing the cart? It's because getting potential snowballs and preventing your enemy from full grouping and getting real team fights is worth way more potential distance and time than if the enemy full groups and fights you eventually. If you give them time, even if you're pushing 3 on, they're gonna full group, they're gonna fight you, and you give them an actual chance to have a fighting chance and actually win the team fight. But if you stagger them and snowball them, you don't give them that chance, and that's exactly what you want to be doing. That's exactly how you want to snowball the enemy. And to the same token, the tempo ultimates that I talked about before, you can do the exact same thing when you are snowballing the enemy. Tempo dragon blades, tempo ultimates, these are things that you can heavily punish the enemy for not full grouping. This means even if there's only 3 enemies and you're 5 people pushing up, just nano blade them, kill the 3 people. Then when they come back, grab them instantly or shatter 1 person. You basically never let the enemy team full group. And sure, you're not getting the most potential value out of each and every one of your ults, but that doesn't matter if you cap the objective. That doesn't matter if you never give the enemy team a real fighting chance. And that's kind of what I want to reiterate here, guys. And it's really important for you to understand this concept because snowballing is something that happens across every rank, and it's something that way too many teams get wrong. And you might be thinking, oh, there's nothing I can do. Snowball is something that my teammates need to stop doing, and there's nothing I can do no matter what I say. But I gave you tons of tips and tricks of things that you could specifically do to stop snowballing, and I guarantee you that you have been part of this problem more than once, 100%. But if you want to make sure that you understand how to counterpick the enemy, how to stop their snowball, what you need to do to potentially stop a snowball instantly, definitely go check out GameLeap.com. GameLeap.com has in-depth tips and tricks and VOD reviews over grandmasters that deal with snowball time and time again. Do yourself a favor and go check it out. You will not regret it. Anyways, if you agree, disagree, if you have any comments, questions, definitely leave them in the comment box down below, as well as if you have any suggestions for videos you want me to make. I would love to hop right on that. Anyways, that's all I have for you today. I'm Coach Mills, and until next time.